And we're joined now by my colleagues and friends, Martha Raddatz, Brian Ross, and Christiane Amanpour. Christiane, let's begin with you. You covered the Arab Spring. You had those exclusive interviews we all remember with Egyptian President Mubarak, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and with Mohamed Morsi, now the president of Egypt. And Christiane, I know you've interviewed the prime ministers of Libya, Egypt, and the spokesman for the Muslim Brotherhood. What are they telling you about these protests? Who's behind them, and who's behind the attack in Benghazi?
Well, what they're saying first and foremost is that obviously this is nothing to do with the governments. They don't support this. They've called them back, they say. And today the Muslim Brotherhood has said that we've made plenty of arrests and we should know in the next few days. But they're trying to recalibrate and put their relations with the United States back on the correct track. They're very, very concerned that this should not disrupt their relations with the United States, whether it's the Egyptian Prime Minister who told me that, the Muslim Brotherhood, the Libyan Prime Minister. And I think it's also important to recognize that this is a seminal moment, Jake, for these Arab emerging democracies. The people have spoken. By and large, they've gone well. By and large, this is a success story. But as we've seen, there are elements that are out of control, most particularly in Libya, where you've got these armed people who are not yet under the government control, not brought into the, under the rule of law. But in Egypt, they say that they've got it under control, and they're very concerned that they want to maintain their relationships and not have this, deter them from their strong relationship with the U.S.
Brian, let's talk about the homeland for a second. This week there were 3 college campuses where there were bomb scares, apparently all false alarms, but they were all called in. Is there a worry that this wave of attacks could spread to the United States, to the homeland itself?
Well, there's concern, but those bomb threats washed out as a real threat. There was an arrest yesterday in Chicago of an 18-year-old who wanted to blow up a bar in Chicago as part of a sort of a sympathy for what's going on in the world against the Muslims. But in general, they see no organized plan to disrupt or to attack in this country. But there are the independent operators who could be inspired.
Martha, you've been to these embassies. How is security arranged? How is it decided who gets Marines, who doesn't? How do they decide when the protests are coming, what they can do to calm things, and when they will actually make things worse if they get involved?
Well, I think that's a real fine line. In Yemen particularly, I was watching this week, and that embassy is very, very hard to breach. You have the host nation, usually on the outer perimeter. They're in charge of security there. But getting inside, you usually have Americans there backing them up, whether they're contractors or security. If you saw those mobs coming, I suppose you would say, let's go after them. But they can't really do that in all these cases. I think particularly in Yemen, they did a pretty good job of just letting them climb the walls but not get over the walls. You don't want to use deadly force if you don't have to, because it makes it much worse. But there are a lot of questions, Jake. You ask a very good question of Susan Rice. Why weren't there Marines in Tripoli in particular?
She didn't answer it.
I'm pretty sure there are Marines in Paris. Why weren't they in Tripoli? And I think that's a question the State Department is looking at right now. And Benghazi, I think you had 25 or 30 people in the entire consulate. How many of those really were security? They overran the perimeter so quickly and were able to get to that main building so fast. That is a huge question.
And Brian, you heard them talk about the YouTube video. You heard Dr. Rice talk about the YouTube video. They're hanging a lot on this YouTube video. Right. You've been looking into the guy behind, the filmmaker, the main filmmaker behind it. What was his motivation? Why did he, first of all, initially falsely claim to be a Jew, an Israeli Jew? And what was he trying to do with this video?
Clearly, he was trying to stir things up with his false claims that he was an Israeli Jew, as he put it, that the money for this came from Jewish donors. In fact, the money came from his wife's family in Egypt, and he was attempting just to stir things up, I think, with this very provocative film.
He's a Coptic Christian.
Coptic Christian, the issues in Egypt between Coptic Christians and extremist Muslims, but he sought to create a hate film. The film was never really produced, just the trailer that was put on YouTube.
It's really like a home video,
like
isn't it? And one person can cause this.
And
Jake,
I was going to say that's so interesting that the actors that were called to say the words, Master George was the main bad guy there. Yeah. Then they dubbed in those 3 syllables with Muhammad.
I mean, it was clearly a film designed to incite, and it's a film designed by an extremist with extremist views here that plays right into the extremist provocateurs over there. But one thing I was really worried about, first of all, there's cynical and dastardly attempt to stoke more hatred by pretending he was Jewish, and now it reveals that he's a Christian. You know, there have been very tense relations between Coptic Christians and Muslims in Egypt, and the one thing I asked the Muslim Brotherhood, is this going to cause a backlash? He said, absolutely not. We are standing absolutely firm. We're not going to let this have any impact on our relations, because that's possibly a very, very, difficult fallout that could happen. I'm pleased that nothing happened in Afghanistan. I mean, I think that's really important is to know that, again, this is a seminal moment. These governments have mostly done the right thing, not just now, but in the lead up to all of this. They're mostly moderate. They want good relationships with the rest of the world. Yes, the people are going to have a voice because these are democracies now in foreign policy going ahead. But as Susan said, and as others have said, look, in Libya, more than half the people support not just US leadership, but the United States and the people of the United States. So I think that should be the takeaway, I think.
Martha, before we end this roundtable, I do want to look forward. And right now we have in the Gulf the largest naval exercise ever in the history of the Middle East. What is the message that the United States military is trying to send here? Is it directly aimed at Iran?
I think it's a pretty obvious message, and I don't think anyone would actually tell you that on camera, Jake, but I think it's pretty obvious the message to Iran is don't even try to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. They've got all these mine-sweeping exercises. It is an enormous exercise. Yes, they normally do exercise, but nothing like this, and they're building up all sorts of missile defense type things in there as well.
And Christiane, just looking forward, the United Nations General Assembly meets this week, and there's a lot of tension right now between Israel and Iran, but also between Israel and the Obama administration. What do you anticipate will happen this week?
Well, we've all been, listening to how they're not going to meet the leaders of the United States and Israel. But I think what's really interesting, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, Ehud Barak, the Israeli defense minister, is starting to walk back the idea of an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. The internal intelligence and defense, by and large, inside Israel has been very lukewarm, if not downright negative, on the idea of a unilateral Israeli attack. I'm being told that's possibly sort of receding as a possibility, at least any time now. But then, and of course, the Israeli people do not want to see their country unilaterally attack Iran. And I think really what we have to know is whether there's going to be any real significant chance for proper negotiations, this negotiation that's going on right now with Iran and the West and the United States, whether that can come to some kind of agreement beyond, short of a kind of military intervention.
And Brian, very quickly, because we're running out of time, what are your sources telling you about how far the Iranians are when it comes to actually building a nuclear device?
4 to 6 weeks away if they'd made the decision to do it. But
they are able to acquire as much.
That is some of the intelligence, but they haven't made that decision. That's the key.
It's so vastly disparate. I mean, others say that it could be a year after they. So this is a guessing game that's gone on for years.
Right. That's the latest claim.
Exactly. All right, Christiane, Brian, Martha, thanks so much for